Hello my friends, how's it going? This is Eric Parker with One Number Tableau Experts. And in this week's video, we're gonna do something a little different. It's gonna be a little bit of freestyling. So we're gonna connect to some international birth rate data by country, and we are going to compare countries to each other. We're gonna look over about a 60-year period of time. Should be fun, should be a little different. If that sounds interesting to you, let's go ahead and dive into this. So this was inspired by, I did a LinkedIn post recently where it was looking at essentially South Korea's birth rate has dropped to, I wanna say it was like 0.8 or 0.6, meaning that for each female in the country, I think that just means like an average of like 0.8 kids are born, less than one kid, which means that the population of that country will naturally shrink over time, you know, unless there's some outside influence like immigration to prop those numbers back up. For a lot of countries, that's of interest, right? They're trying to figure out how does like Social Security work for the next generation if the generation that needs to support the older generation is smaller, or how does healthcare work, right? There's so many different things that are tied to this. So that's a little bit of some of the backstory as to why you might be interested in analyzing birth rate. So let me show you a few different charts that I created while just doing an initial exploration of this data. Then we'll create some of these ourselves, okay? So one of them was just comparing each country's birth rate over time to just sort of the median of all countries with a line graph. Another would be a map, which would allow you to see how birth rate has changed throughout the world over time. Okay. And then finally, I've just got the slope chart, which would show you, which countries have seen, some of the biggest change in birth rate. Okay. So I'm going to go connect to a new version. I've got two copies of the data source here. So one of them is just sort of totally fresh and untouched. I downloaded this data from the World Bank, so it is hopefully accurate. They are sort of the source of truth here. So this is what the data looks like. We're gonna have to do some cleanup. There's kind of some blank rows at the top. Instead of birth rate being a single column and a measure, it's broken out across a bunch of different columns. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of kind of restructuring of the data. I'm gonna link a video down below if you wanna see a more deep dive on how to structure and prepare data for Tableau. That might be of interest. That said though, let's go ahead and dive into this. So I've established this initial connection to the birth rate data, but look at the columns. Look what Tableau calls these things. It's like F1, F2, F7, F8. I hate to break it to you, this isn't Formula One racing. These are not the kind of Fs that we want to be seeing. So we're gonna go back to the data source tab, and what I'm gonna do here, let me see. I'm gonna click this little checkbox here, use data interpreter. I'm sure there's a lot of different things the data interpreter does, but one of them for sure is that it tries to figure out what are actually the names of these columns supposed to be. So you can see now I've gotten them broken out like so. I don't really need that indicator code. I'm assuming that's if you download multiple indicators from the World Bank at once. Same with the indicator name. Neither of those is really providing value for me, so I'm gonna go ahead and hide those. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select 1960, and then I'm gonna scroll to the right of my screen all the way until 2020, shift select, hit the drop down, and pivot this data. While that does its thing, I'm gonna add a link to where I got this data so that if you wanna download this data for yourself, then you can kind of follow along with this video. Okay. So let's rename pivot field names. I'm gonna rename this to year, and pivot field values, this will be birth rate. All right. And okay, I'm gonna do a new sheet here, okay. Okay, this is gonna be kind of birth rate line graph version 2, kind of recreating more or less what we saw there at the beginning. So let me take my year field and make this continuous, if it will be so kind. Will it? Oh, okay. Actually, let me make it a number first. So I'm gonna make it a whole number, and I'm gonna make this field continuous. What that's gonna do is gonna allow me to throw this on columns and just see like, okay, 1960 through 2020. I'm gonna change, if it will let me, I'm gonna change the default aggregation to a birth rate to median. So now we can see what is the median birth rate over time. Let me add a number format to this and just set it to 2 decimal places as well. So you can see the median birth rate by country, mind you, so it's not broken down and weighted by population, but the median birth rate by country in 1960 was 6.08, and that number was down to 2.11 in 2020. Now 2.11 or 2.1, that is considered a replacement birth rate. What that means is, if a country had no immigration or anything and there was 2.1 kids born to each female, then the population would be able to sustain itself in size. Okay. So what'll be interesting would be to take something like a country name and put that on detail and see what we get, right? So there's some interesting trends here. You can see Yemen, right? Yemen kind of popped up, actually saw an increase in their birth rate, and then it came back down. There's some other interesting ones, just based on a lot of times internal conflict in that country. Like South Sudan, you could see their birth rate actually went up and then came back down. Okay, so this is all pretty interesting, but it is kind of a spaghetti mess, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a calculated field, and I wanna find the overall median birth rate for each year across all countries, okay? So actually, let me think about this. What I might do, this actually might be easier than doing a calculation. I'm gonna do a dual axis. So now I've got median birth rate here and median birth rate here. The second one though, I'm gonna take country name off of detail. And let me just change the color so that it can stand out a little bit. So that's the overall median across all countries, whereas this is just, the blue ones are just the rate within a single country. I'm gonna do a few things here. I wanna mute those lines at the country level a little bit, so I'll make them gray and maybe make the size of them a little bit less. And then what could be interesting here would be, I'm gonna show the highlighter for a country. So I go to the country name, my marks card, hit the drop down, show highlighter. And now if you have a country you want to look at, like let's start with something I'm familiar with, the old United States. You can see here's the US. So starting at about the mid 3s in 1960 and then working its way down to, in this case, 1.6 or so that's Sweden. Well, it's still around there in 2020, okay? So that's, kind of an interesting option if you want to kind of see, okay, the United Kingdom is pretty similar, right? Maybe you try a different country. We'll shout out to our colleague on the channel here, Ollie, right there, South Africa. Starts a little higher and ends a little higher, right? So there you go. There's sort of option number one, creating a line graph, doing that level of comparison. Interesting, kind of hard to make sense of. I mean, there's kind of some interesting lines to be able to pull out of here, but you might need to be able to do some filtering to really get a lot of value out of this. Okay, next up, this will be the birth rate map. Alrighty, in this, let's go ahead and put country name on detail. Could leave it as circles like that. Actually might not be a bad move. I know the original map I had the shapes filled in, which looks nice, but it's kind of hard to distinguish the countries. What I'm gonna do here is put birth rate on color. And I'm gonna do a diverging color. With this diverging color, what I'm gonna do is change the palette to orange blue, and I'm gonna set an advanced feature to set the center point at 2.1. That is that replacement rate, okay? So what this would do is this would make it so that a country is orange if it's below the replacement rate or blue if it's above it. And then I wanna see this broken out by year though. What did things look like in 1960? What did they look like in 2020? So we're gonna use the Pages shelf here. The Pages shelf is very cool for sort of seeing animation over time. It doesn't really work on Tableau server, so it's mostly just gonna be for Tableau desktop, maybe if you're doing a presentation from your computer. So let me put the year field on Pages. And right now it's set to 1960. Greenland is showing up as orange, but it's actually just because there's no value. So let me actually add birth rate to filters. Say all values, special, and only keep the non-null values. Okay. So now let me set this on the fastest speed that the Pages shelf has. And let's just watch this thing run over time from 1960 on through to 2020. So it is interesting to see that the graph is, or the map is slowly going from more blue to more orange. Now, I think one thing that's missing, I guess you get it in the title there, but it's not super obvious what year it is as we go. So I'm gonna stop this for a second. Something I like to do if I'm ever using the Pages shelf is if you right click somewhere in the background of your map or any worksheet really, and say annotate point, one of the things that you can put in the annotation is the page think I want to put the page number. Could be wrong, I might change that. Let's go ahead and try that. Yep, not page number because that says 45. So let's try page name. There we go. So now I think, I need to get rid of that little line, don't I? Go away, line. No line. Okay, so now what I could do is take this back to the beginning and let this thing run, and at least now it's a little more obvious what year it is as things are changing. So this is sort of an interesting way to see what areas of the world have gone from being above replacement rate to below replacement rate over this time period. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and just yank this thing to the finish. You can check that out more if you want. Oh, it's restarting. That's awesome. I must have set it to keep going. So there's what the world looks like in 2020, right? So sub-Saharan Africa, parts of the Middle East, parts of South America, but a good chunk of the world is below replacement rate now for population growth. Okay, last up would be our birth rate slope chart. Okay, and something, oh yeah, can't name it the same name. Okay, something I think will be valuable here is it's just a bit much to see all of these different countries at once. So I think it'd be interesting and valuable to maybe group the countries into world regions. This is going to be very inexact, but I'm going to show you a quick way that we could group the countries. So I throw the countries here into this worksheet. I'm going to change my selector to lasso. And what I'm going to do here is now I can select countries, freeform, and I'm going to start grouping different regions of the world together. I apologize if I'm doing this in a way that you deem poor. I'm just doing the best I can, having kind of sort of limited options here and going quickly. I don't know, Gibraltar is a country. I have no idea if that's Europe or not. All right, exactly. We're just gonna go. It's just gonna make the best of it as best we can. Do one for Europe as best I can. So maybe something like that. And then I'll break Asia into Australasia and just the main parts of Asia. Okay. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to rename these different sections. So red, I'm going to say edit alias, and that'll be Europe. Let's see, orange, that's Africa. That kind of green color, that's Australasia. What else do we have? We've got blue, that's the Americas. And then gray would just be kind of the Asia, I guess the land part of Asia, whatever you want to call that. Okay, so now that just created this group. So what's going to be nice about that is that once we create our slope chart, we'll be able to add that as a filter. So for the slope chart, it's actually it's nothing too crazy. What I'm going to do is put my year field on columns, and I'm going to filter this down. I need to put year on filters, and I need to actually change this to a discrete field. And I just, for our analysis, I'm just going to keep the very first and the very last year. So just 1960 and 2020. I'm going to put birth rate on rows. I'm going to put country name on detail. And then we don't really need to see all these values here in the middle. I mean, it's okay, but I'm going to change year on the columns from continuous, where it creates this continuous axis, to discrete, where it just creates a label. So just 1960 to 2020. I got to change my line, or my mark type to line now. Now it's not fitting very well, so let's change this to fit width. Let's put birth rate on color, and once again, I'll set the center point at 2.1. Okay. And then like I was saying, it's kind of a lot to look at, right? There's a lot of countries in there. So what could be cool would be maybe I've got a, country group. That's a filter that I could choose from. Maybe country name, even if somebody wants to highlight a specific country that they're interested in. And then for example, if I say, okay, well, let's just look at the Americas. What does that look like? Okay, now I could see, okay, a Dominican Republic was the highest value in 1960, where are they at now? They're still higher, but they're not the highest, right? Whereas Uruguay was, interestingly, the lowest in 1960 and is not the lowest anymore, but on the lower end. Notice that the country name the country names aren't updating along with my selections in the group up here. So that might be an interesting one to hit the drop down on the country name filter and say only relevant values. So it takes a cue from this filter and then is only showing you the names of the countries based on what's selected up above. I'm gonna go ahead and add apply buttons to these filters as well. I think that's gonna, this isn't too big of a data source, but I think that's usually kind of nice if you're like, hey, I just wanna compare these 3 countries. Now I can do that more easily. So like, this is interesting. Like in Africa, okay, which countries are below replacement rate? Cabo Verde, Mauritius, Malta. I'm an international studies major and I couldn't really tell you what's going on with those countries so as to be lower than the others, but maybe somebody here in the comments knows more than me about the matter. So there you go. That's a little bit of freestyling, getting to explore international birth rates. I hope you found this interesting. So side note for you here, if you check out this info button here in the top corner, we run Tableau classes every month. The basics, the intermediate, calculations, Tableau prep. We really firmly believe that nobody should have to go their Tableau journey alone. And Tableau is a really wonderful and powerful tool, but it's also really nuanced and it's hard to learn on your own. So if you'd like to join us for a class, we would love to have you. You can check that out here. In general, thanks for checking out this video. We drop new Tableau content here on the YouTube channel every single week. We'd love to have you join for some of those in the future. So thank you again, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks.